It was a Tuesday morning in the summer of 2008. An ordinary Tuesday, by all appearances. No television cameras had been sent to capture it. No journalists were waiting at the gate. No club announcement had been prepared. The training ground at Sant Joan d'Espí, the facility where FC Barcelona prepared its players for battle, was operating on its usual rhythm. Staff arriving early. Groundskeepers checking the pitch. The administrative offices filling slowly with the sound of keyboards and telephone calls. Nothing about that morning suggested that something irreversible was happening. Nothing except for one man, alone on the grass. Long after everyone else had gone inside. His name needed no introduction anywhere on earth. But standing there in the empty stadium, without the crowd, without the lights, without the roar that had followed his every touch for years, he was simply a man with a football at his feet. Doing what he had always done, what he had done before fame found him, and what he was doing now, perhaps for the last time, in the place that had given him everything. Ronaldinho Gaúcho was saying goodbye. He just had not told anyone yet. To understand what that moment meant, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to Barcelona, not to Paris, not even to the streets of Porto Alegre where the legend was born. You have to go back further, to the feeling itself. The feeling that made Ronaldinho different from every other extraordinary player of his generation. Most footballers, even great ones, experience the game as a problem to be solved, a defender to beat, a gap to find, a position to occupy. The mind calculates. The body executes. It is precise and purposeful, and often beautiful, but it is fundamentally a form of applied intelligence. You see the solution. You perform it. Ronaldinho did not experience football this way. Or at least, that is not how it appeared from the outside, and there is no reason to believe the inside was any different. When he received the ball, something else happened entirely. It was not calculation. It was closer to music. The instinct of a musician who does not think about which note comes next, who simply feels the melody and lets the body follow. The ball was not a tool he wielded. It was more like an extension of his mood. And his mood, almost always, was joy. This is not a sentimental exaggeration. The people who trained alongside him, who competed against him, who coached him and managed him and tried to stop him, all arrive at the same description eventually. Not just talented, not just skillful, joyful. Genuinely, childishly, almost bewilderingly joyful. In a profession defined by pressure and consequence and the grinding weight of expectation, Ronaldinho played as though none of that existed. As though the pitch were a playground. As though the audience were invisible, and the only thing in the world were the ball and the next interesting thing he could do with it. It made people love him in a way that transcended football. Other players were admired. Ronaldinho was adored. There is a difference. Admiration is what you feel when you recognize excellence. Adoration is what you feel when something makes you happy, just by existing. Ronaldinho made people happy just by existing on a football pitch, and the smile, that famous, wide, unguarded smile, was not a performance. It was the natural expression of someone who could not quite believe how much fun he was having. He was born Ronaldo de Assis Moreira on March 21, 1980, in Porto Alegre, in the state of Rio Grande do Sul in southern Brazil. His family called him Ronaldinho, Little Ronaldo, to distinguish him from his older brother Roberto, who was also known as Ronaldo. The nickname stuck, and eventually the whole world used it, though in Brazil they added Gaúcho, the word for someone from Rio Grande do Sul, to distinguish him from another Ronaldo who would become equally famous. His father, João, was a shipyard worker and an amateur footballer. He died of a heart attack when Ronaldinho was 8 years old. The loss was catastrophic for the family, devastating in the way that only the sudden absence of a parent can be. but football remained. His brother Roberto, who had played professionally, became a central figure in his development. His mother, Miguelina, worked to keep the family together. And the boy with the ball kept playing, kept smiling, kept finding in the game something that nothing else quite provided. He grew up in a neighborhood called Vila Nova, not wealthy, not comfortable in the way that wealth provides comfort, but alive with the sound of children playing and the particular democracy of street football, where talent is the only currency that matters. On the streets of Porto Alegre, young Ronaldinho did not just develop technique. He developed imagination. Street football demands improvisation because there are no rules, no coaches, no structured systems. You learn to read situations in real time. You learn to find solutions that no one taught you because no one could have anticipated the problem. You learn, above everything else, to enjoy yourself. Because if you are not enjoying yourself on a street in Vila Nova with no crowd and no prize and nothing at stake, but the pleasure of the next touch, then why are you playing at all? That question, why are you playing at all, had an obvious answer for Ronaldinho from the beginning. He was playing because it was the greatest thing he had ever felt. And that feeling never left him, even when everything else changed. Grêmio, the Porto Alegre club where his brother had played, noticed him early. He joined their youth academy as a child and developed there through his adolescence, the technique formalizing around the imagination he had already built on the street. By the time he was a teenager, it was clear he was not simply promising. He was exceptional in a category of his own, doing things with a football that coaches struggled to explain and opponents could not prepare for because no one had prepared a training manual for stopping something no one had seen before. He made his professional debut for Grêmio in 1998 at 18 years old. Within 2 years, he was representing Brazil at the Sydney Olympics, winning a silver medal and announcing himself to the world with the kind of performances that made football people stop what they were doing and watch. In 2001, Paris Saint-Germain signed him, making him one of the most expensive Brazilian exports of his generation. Paris was not the destination anyone would have chosen for a player of his temperament. Cold city, difficult club, turbulent politics. But Ronaldinho brought his joy with him and produced moments of beauty, even when the team around him was struggling. He was there for 2 years. Then came Barcelona, and everything changed. The summer of 2003, FC Barcelona was searching for itself. The club had spent years underperforming, caught between its history and its ambition, producing flashes of brilliance without the consistency that championships require. Joan Laporta had just been elected president. Frank Rijkaard had been appointed head coach, and somewhere in the sporting department, a decision was made that would define the next decade of football. They signed Ronaldinho for a fee of around €30 million, a significant sum. But not the largest in football. Barcelona acquired not just a footballer but a spirit, a way of approaching the game that, as it turned out, the entire club needed. The players around him did not just improve when he arrived, they became different players. Something about the way he played, the freedom he embodied, the belief he carried that the game existed to be enjoyed, infected the entire squad. Xavi Hernandez later spoke about this in terms that were almost philosophical. Samuel Eto'o said Ronaldinho made him believe that anything was possible. Even a young player named Lionel Messi, 16 years old and recently promoted to the first team, would later describe watching Ronaldinho train as the most formative experience of his career. Not just technically, emotionally, psychologically. The permission Ronaldinho gave, through his example, to enjoy the game and trust the instinct. That was perhaps the most important thing he passed on. But before we speak of legacies, we must speak of the thing itself. The football. The actual, specific, breathtaking football that Ronaldinho played during those years at Barcelona. The season of 2004 to 2005 was something extraordinary. Barcelona won La Liga for the first time in 6 years. Ronaldinho was everywhere in that campaign. Goals, assists, dribbles that seemed to suspend the laws of physics. Passes that arrived at angles no computer could have calculated in time. He won the FIFA World Player of the Year award. He was, without question or serious debate, the best footballer on the planet. But the moment that has been preserved most completely in the collective memory of football did not happen in a final or a decisive match, or even a particularly important game. It happened on the night of November 19, 2005, at the Santiago Bernabéu in Madrid. A regular La Liga fixture. Barcelona against Real Madrid. The kind of match that carries the weight of history regardless of what is at stake on the table. Ronaldinho scored twice that night. The first goal was a long-range shot of extraordinary precision. The second was a piece of individual brilliance that involved beating 2 defenders, holding off a third, and placing the ball exactly where the goalkeeper could not reach it. Neither goal was, strictly speaking, unprecedented. He had scored goals like these before. But what happened after the second goal had never happened before in the history of that stadium, and has not happened in quite the same way since. The crowd at the Bernabéu stood up and applauded, not politely, not briefly, standing, sustained, genuine applause for a Barcelona player in Real Madrid's home ground from Real Madrid's own supporters. In the history of the Clásico, which stretches back more than a century, this had essentially never occurred. Rival fans do not applaud opponents at the Bernabéu. The hostility there is structural, deeply rooted, part of the identity of the place. And yet 80,000 people who had come to watch their own team beat Barcelona found themselves on their feet for the man in the blue and red shirt, simply because what he had done was too beautiful to respond to any other way. Ronaldinho jogged away from the goal with his arms raised, and he was smiling. Of course he was smiling. He won the Ballon d'Or that year. Then he won it again in 2005. 2 consecutive years as the world's best player, which placed him in a small and extraordinary company. In those 2 years, Barcelona played football that people still describe with a kind of reverence usually reserved for art rather than sport. Not just winning. Playing in a way that made people feel something. And then, because time does not negotiate and peaks do not last, things began to change. The decline, when it came, was not sudden. It rarely is with players of this stature. It was more like a gradual dimming. The same gifts still present, but operating at slightly lower frequency. The magic still appearing but less reliably, the moments of genius punctuated by longer stretches of the ordinary. Injuries played a role. Changes in the team's structure played a role. The arrival of a young Argentine named Messi, who was beginning to suggest that he might become the greatest player the game had ever seen, shifted the center of gravity within the squad in ways that were perhaps inevitable but no less uncomfortable for being so. By 2007 and into 2008, the conversations that are always held in football, about form, about fitness, about whether a player's best was behind him, had begun to surround Ronaldinho with an insistence that was impossible to ignore. He was 27, then 28 years old. Not old, but in a sport where physical peak and mental sharpness must coincide precisely. Where the window of sustained excellence is narrow, the questions were being asked. The relationship with Barcelona, which had been so luminous, was beginning to show strain. Not hostility, it was never hostile. More a quiet divergence between what the club now needed and what Ronaldinho could now consistently provide. The performances were still there sometimes. The smile was still there always. but something had shifted in the alignment between player and institution, and both sides could feel it without quite being ready to say it. The summer of 2008 was when the conversation became concrete. Barcelona and Ronaldinho's representatives were talking about his future. Milan was interested. There were other clubs. The end of this chapter was approaching, even if the final sentence had not yet been written. And so we arrive back at that Tuesday morning. The ordinary Tuesday that was not ordinary at all. The training session had ended. The other players had gone in. To the showers, to lunch, to the afternoon routines that professional footballers follow. The coaching staff had gathered their materials. The groundskeepers were beginning their post-training work on the pitch. The stadium was emptying, as it does every day, into the quiet that follows organized activity. Ronaldinho stayed. He took a ball and began to juggle it, keeping it in the air with his feet, his knees, his chest. Occasionally his head, the same movements he had performed 10,000 times since childhood, since the streets of Vila Nova, since before anyone in the world knew his name. No purpose, no drill, no instruction. Just the ball and the air and the rhythm of keeping them connected. A groundskeeper, working near the tunnel that led back to the dressing rooms, stopped what he was doing and watched. He did not approach. He did not speak. He simply observed. The way you observe something that deserves to be observed. Later, he would describe what he saw in a way that said everything about the moment without explaining it. He was not sad, the groundskeeper said. He was smiling, like he was saying goodbye to an old friend. There is something in that description that reaches beyond sentiment into something real about the nature of these partings. The pitch at Sant Joan d'Espí was not just a place where Ronaldinho had worked for 5 years. It was the place where the best version of his football had been expressed. It was the ground where he had discovered, in the most complete way possible, what he could do when everything aligned. When the teammates understood him, when the coach trusted him, when the fans adored him, when the game itself seemed to open up before him like a gift. He had been, in this place, the best footballer in the world. And some part of him knew, in the way that great performers always know, that it would not come again in quite the same form. So he juggled the ball. He kept it in the air in the empty stadium, on the grass that had witnessed everything, and he smiled. Not the performed smile he had offered to cameras and crowds for years, but the private smile, the smile of a man alone with the thing he loves most, in a moment of pure, uncomplicating feeling. 3 days later, on July 19, 2008, FC Barcelona announced that Ronaldinho Gaúcho would be leaving the club. His destination was Associazione Calcio Milan. The fee was reported at around €30 million, the same as what Barcelona had paid for him 5 years earlier. In financial terms, a clean transaction. In human terms, the closing of something that would never quite open again. The announcement was received, in Barcelona and around the football world, with the kind of sadness that greets the end of an era. Not tragedy. He was still young, still talented, still capable of producing moments of brilliance. But the particular combination of that player, in that city, with those teammates, in those years, that was over, and the people who had witnessed it understood, perhaps only in its absence, what they had been given. In Milan, Ronaldinho recovered some of his form. He had beautiful seasons there, moments that reminded anyone who needed reminding what he was capable of. He also had difficult periods. He returned to Brazil eventually, to Flamengo and then to other clubs. And whenever he appeared, the reception was the same. Enormous affection, immediate recognition. That particular joy that audiences feel when someone who once made them happy walks back into view. He represented Brazil throughout this period, collecting memories, rather than the major tournament victory that would have completed the formal record of his career. He had won the World Cup in 2002, when he was 22, and at his electric, terrifying best. He had won Copa America. He had won everything there was to win at club level with Barcelona. But there was a feeling in Brazilian football circles, a quiet, persistent feeling, that the national team had not quite used him in the way that might have produced something more. That the translation of his gifts into the collective project of the Seleção had been imperfect. This is the melancholy of great players. Not that they failed, but that even what they achieved felt, from certain angles, like less than the full promise suggested. He retired from professional football in January 2018, at 37 years old. The retirement was confirmed after a period without a club, without the offer that would have made one more season worth pursuing. He did not retire at the top. He retired as careers mostly end, gradually, then suddenly, with the game itself providing the final word. But here is the thing about careers that end this way, about players whose peak was so luminous that everything after it exists in a different quality of light. The record is the record. The performances are documented. The goals and the assists and the trophies and the awards. All of that is permanent. But what Ronaldinho left behind was something less quantifiable, and perhaps more durable than any of those things. He left behind a feeling. The feeling that football, at its highest expression, is not merely a contest, but something closer to joy made physical. That the most technical, the most pressured, the most consequential environment in which the game is played can still contain the spirit of a child in Vila Nova, juggling a ball because it feels good to juggle a ball. He left behind the proof that this was possible. Not as an occasional accident, not as a fleeting moment, but as a sustained, 5-year demonstration in front of the largest audiences in the sport. That is what the groundskeeper witnessed on that Tuesday morning in 2008. Not just a great footballer taking a ball around an empty pitch, but the last private expression of something that had changed, for millions of people, what football meant to them. He juggled the ball. He smiled. Nobody was watching. Or rather, one person was watching, and that person understood, without being told, that they were witnessing a farewell. Footballers become many things in the public imagination. They become symbols of their clubs, representatives of their nations, subjects of argument and analysis, and the particular kind of reverence that sport generates in people who care about it deeply. The best of them transcend even this. They become associated, in the minds of the people who watched them, with a feeling rather than just a set of achievements. You mention the name and something happens in the listener that is not quite memory and not quite emotion, but something in between. A sense of what it felt like to watch them. A sense of what they added to the world. Say the name Ronaldinho to almost anyone who was watching football between 2003 and 2006, and that is what happens. Not a recitation of statistics. Not a listing of honors. A feeling. The feeling of watching someone play football the way it is supposed to be played. With everything they have. For the pure love of doing it, smiling because they cannot help smiling. He said goodbye to that pitch with no ceremony, because the pitch needed no ceremony. The relationship between Ronaldinho and a football did not require witnesses or words. It only required the two of them, alone in the morning, doing what they had always done. The groundskeeper watched until Ronaldinho eventually walked back toward the tunnel. He did not know, in that moment, whether what he had seen was significant. He had not heard about the transfer rumors. He did not know that 3 days later the news would break and Barcelona would officially begin its life without its most joyful player. He only knew what he had seen, a man alone on a pitch, playing with a football and smiling. playing the way people play when there is no one left to impress, and nothing left to prove, and the only reason to play is the feeling of the game itself. That is how Ronaldinho left Barcelona. Not in the press conference, though the press conference came. Not in the handshakes and the official statements and the carefully worded tributes from club officials, though those came too. He left on that Tuesday morning, alone on the grass, with the ball at his feet, the way everything had started. The way everything, if you are lucky enough and grateful enough, and in love enough with what you do, is permitted to end. He was smiling. He was always smiling. That was the thing about Ronaldinho. Even at the end. Even in the goodbye, the smile was real, and it was there. And it told you everything about what the game had meant to him from the first touch to the last. Some players leave their clubs and leave a gap in the lineup. Some leave a gap in the trophies. Ronaldinho left something less replaceable. He left a gap in the joy. And any honest account of what Barcelona was in those years and what football could be, when the right person was playing it the right way, any honest account has to begin and end with that smile. With a man alone on an empty pitch, juggling a ball for no reason except that he loved it. That is the story. It does not need a different ending. It is already the right one.